The greatest fear of all politicians is to go down in history in a very bad way. That's why politicians never want their political career to end in this way. They aim to influence history for a long time to come, but this does not always work. An allegation that is being discussed among politicians in Europe today is of great importance for the outcome of the war. They say that Lukashenko's political career is about to end. Putin no longer wants to cooperate with Lukashenko. This claim may lead to a change in the political balance all over the world. This research shows that the crisis in Belarus is very likely to affect the whole world. To talk about all this, let us first briefly recall the situation in Belarus. As you know, Belarus was founded in 1991 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In this process, it did not break its ties with the Russian Federation, which was established as a continuation of the Soviet Union. Relations between the two countries continued. In 1994, the first elections were held in Belarus, and Lukashenko became the country's first president. This election, won by Lukashenko, was recognized all over the world. However, after taking office, Lukashenko started to implement repressive policies. None of the results of the elections held after this election can be trusted. Lukashenko is interfering in the elections. Lukashenko uses state power to propagandize against his opponents. He uses state channels to accuse his political opponents of treason. This is destroying the legitimacy of the elections. In doing so, Lukashenko needed support. This support was provided by Putin in the 1999 elections. Vladimir Putin, who became the leader of Russia, established strong relations with Lukashenko from the moment he took office. In this way, Putin aimed to exert influence over Belarus. In a short period of time, he succeeded in achieving this goal. The Lukashenko administration in Belarus has faced many problems. Putin has always supported Lukashenko in solving these problems. However, this relationship has recently entered a crisis. Putin feels he's not getting enough support from Belarus in his invasion of Ukraine. Belarusian President Lukashenko is very reluctant to support this war. This attitude of Lukashenko has caused problems between the two countries. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has fired hundreds of missiles at Ukraine from Belarusian territory. But this was not enough for Putin. Putin did everything in his power to get Belarus to join this war. Despite Russia's demands, Belarus insisted on not going to war. This caused tensions between Lukashenko and Putin. The two leaders broke the cooperation they had maintained for nearly 25 years. European leaders started to talk about a very important claim. Allegedly, Russian President Vladimir Putin now wants the Belarusian president to change. For this, he has made very important moves. These moves have worried Lukashenko. According to the agreements between Russia and Belarus, if Belarus is attacked, Russia will defend the country. But Lukashenko is very worried about this agreement during his visit to Russia. Lukashenko held several meetings on this issue. First of all, he had a meeting with Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Lukashenko asked Sergei Shoigu what Russia could do for the defense of Belarus. However, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu gave very hesitant answers to these questions. After this meeting, Lukashenko also had a meeting with Putin, but this meeting did not go well for him. Lukashenko began to feel helpless. The election period is approaching in Belarus. Lukashenko is completely helpless this time because there was a great chaos in Belarus after the elections held in 2020. Lukashenko claimed to have won the elections with over 80% of the vote, but this was not the reality. The Belarusian people did not accept these election results and started a huge revolt. However, Lukashenko exerted great pressure to suppress these rebellions. Putin supported Lukashenko in this process. Lukashenko started arresting protesters after the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic spread around the world. Protesters in Belarus returned home, but this time, the Belarusian people say they will never allow the elections to be manipulated. Lukashenko needs Russia's support to stay in power because Western countries call Lukashenko Europe's last dictator. That's why they do not have good relations with Belarus. This hurts the Belarusian economy, but Lukashenko was preventing his country from going bankrupt thanks to Putin's economic support. But Putin no longer wants to send economic support to Lukashenko. There is nothing Lukashenko can do in this situation. Belarusians are already debating who should replace Lukashenko. The Belarusian people want liberal policies in line with the West. For this, Belarus's international relations will have to change completely. This will also reflect badly on Putin. European leaders are already discussing who will replace Lukashenko. This debate is very important for the future of world politics because Belarus is located between Europe and Russia and has a very important geographical position. European leaders want Belarus to pursue a policy in line with Europe, but Putin has different plans. As you know, Putin wanted the Belarusian army to go to war against Ukraine, but Lukashenko, fearing the reaction of the Belarusian people, did not allow it. The Russian army continues to suffer a very heavy defeat in Ukraine. According to Putin, Russia must attack through Belarus to capture Kiev. The southern border of Belarus is very close to Kiev. This may make Putin's job easier, but the Belarusian people do not want to be part of this war. Belarusians are furious about Putin's interruptions. Belarusians hate Putin. That's why they attach great importance to the new administration's independent policy vis-a-vis Russia. Putin fails to convince the Belarusian people. Putin is facing a huge public backlash in Russia, too. Putin's repressive policies are no longer accepted by the people. Putin is trying to fight both the Ukrainian army and the protesters, but he is failing in both. The growing protests in Russia are also being followed in Belarus. Belarusians are doing their best to get rid of Putin's repression. The elections in Belarus will be a turning point. The Belarusian people, European politicians, and Kremlin leaders all agree on one thing. Lukashenko's political career is over. The leader of Belarus must change. If as a result of this change, the Belarusian government established a good relation with the West, this could completely change the course of the war. Russia is now using Belarusian military bases and airports. If Russia cannot use them, it will never win the war in Ukraine. Belarus government crisis has become one of the most critical issues of the war. What do you think will happen in Belarus? What do you think about the revolt of the Belarusian people? How do you think the changes in Belarus will affect the course of the war? Russians managed to achieve a significant breakthrough on the northern flank. They got extremely close to establishing control over the village that guards the only remaining way out of Bahamut. Ukrainians saw that the situation started to worsen rapidly, immediately reinforced the flanks, successfully secured the retreat route, and finally ordered Ukrainians to leave the town. Last time I told you that Russian forces had concentrated their efforts on taking the village of Gromov in order to establish complete fire control over the field and effectively close the pocket around the town. I also told you that Ukrainians heavily reinforced the northern flank in an attempt to stop Russian advancement. The freshest report suggests that Ukrainians managed to achieve their objective because as of today, Russian sources report that Ukrainians continue holding the fence in Gromov, which secures the movement in and out of the city. And this is extremely important because Ukrainians have finally started to actively withdraw from Bahamut. Yesterday, Ukrainian commander reported that his unit received the order to immediately withdraw from Bahamut and move into a new combat zone. Simultaneously, the geolocated footage showed that Ukrainian troops had destroyed two critical bridges in the Bahamut area, one in northeastern Bahamut and one west of Bahamut. The Institute for the Study of War commented on this situation and concluded that Ukrainians were rapidly setting conditions for a controlled withdrawal from parts of Bahamut. At this moment, the Ukrainians have completed the first stage of withdrawal by entirely leaving the eastern bank of the river. This is commensurate with other reports such as the Russians finally entered the meat processing plant and advanced towards the central part of the town right where the bridge is located. The preemptive destruction of this bridge is likely an indicator that Ukrainian troops seek to inhibit Russian movement in eastern Bahamut, especially of motorized elements. Ukrainians are also slowly stepping back from the southern part of the town to avoid being outflanked, and also because there are more reliable positions behind them in the high-rise buildings. And since we are at the point of withdrawal, there is no need to fight for every block. Russians continue to push from the south, but with very limited success. Weather conditions do not allow them to be mobile and aggressive, especially when attacking directly from the fields. That is why they are more focused on assaulting the suburbs of Bahamut. The main goal here remains to get to the intersection, establish fire control over the fields, and close the pocket around the town from the south. Over the last several weeks, they managed to advance by around 300 meters from the forest towards the intersection, and right now there are 400 meters left, so there are timely success here is unlikely. Weather conditions also have an impact on Ukrainian withdrawal since they have to cross the fields in the lowlands. The ground here is soaked in thawed snow. It is extremely difficult to use regular cars because one wrong move can cause the car sliding on the mud like on the ice and can easily get it stuck on the side of the road. Off-road cars and especially infantry fighting vehicles cope with it much better. A lot of soldiers just resort to crossing the fields by foot. New videos continuously emerge showing more and more Ukrainian soldiers outside of Bahamut. One of the videos showed that Bahamut fighters had been sent to the rear position, such as Konstantinovka. Overall, the battle for Bahamut is almost over, and Ukrainian high command did not allow the situation to deteriorate to the point of no return. It looks like all Ukrainian soldiers will gradually withdraw from the town, and Russians will not capture thousands of Ukrainian troops as some sources previously forecasted. Bahamut is not the last obstacle on the way of Russians, so it is much better to save manpower and organize defensive positions along the heights of Joseph, which is exactly what Ukrainian commanders are doing right now. Japan is involved in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida stated that the Japanese army will take part on the territory of Ukraine. Kishida's statements caused a red alert in the Kremlin. The war between Russia and Ukraine, which has left 1 year behind, has started to escalate. While everyone was waiting for the war to end, the statements made by Russian leader Vladimir Putin showed that the war would drag on even longer. Russian leader Vladimir Putin's military buildup on the border with Belarus and the Crimean Peninsula has mobilized Ukraine and allied countries. Russian forces in the Luhansk and Donetsk regions were hot. Clashes continue are still attacking the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army does not let the Russian forces pass with the defense lines it has established here. However, when it was learned that Putin was planning to attack the Ukrainian army with 500,000 people in the spring, the Ukrainian army took action. Russian forces have been trying to capture the Ukrainian city of Bahamut for the last few months after the US and Germany took action to prevent a new attack plan of the occupying Russian forces. Japan also made a statement. Japan, which has been involved in the Ukraine war, has had tense relations with Russia for 77 years. The tension between these two countries eventually affected the war in Ukraine in the first months of the war. Japanese authorities were among the first countries to impose sanctions and embargoes on Russia, stating that they did not really recognize the occupation and annexation of the Russian army in Ukraine. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida stated that they had ended their trade relations with the Russian government and they were gradually withdrawing their companies operating in Russia. At the beginning of the war, Japan, which did not send military support to Ukraine but imposed sanctions on Russia, was trying to adopt a neutral stance. However, the Japanese Prime Minister's patience ran out after the Russian army attacked the Japanese islands. The Kuril Islands dispute between Russia and Japan, which has been going on for years, has led Japan to take a stand against Russia. Putin, who illegally annexed the Kuril Islands belonging to Japan years ago, sent Russian Navy ships off the Kuril Islands to protect these islands. The Japanese military kept Navy ships near the Kuril Islands to protect its borders. These Navy ships, which were tasked with protecting their own islands, were kept in a defense position against a new Russian threat, and they expect happened. Russian Navy ships and the Kuril Islands claimed that Japanese ships had violated the border and organized artillery fire on the Japanese islands in order to prevent a new war. The Japanese government decided not to attack the Russian Navy ships and to withdraw its own Navy ships. However, 2 days after Russia's attack, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida made a statement saying that they responded positively to Ukraine's request for military support. After Russia's threats, the Japanese Prime Minister said that Russian President Vladimir Putin had previously illegally annexed the Kuril Islands and was now trying to do the same on Ukrainian territory, and this must be prevented. He said that the Russian forces should not be allowed to advance further on Ukrainian territory and announced that they will send a large number of tanks and armored vehicles, which are also used by the Japanese army to Ukraine. The Japanese government has decided to send 15 Type 90 model battle tanks and Type 96 model armored vehicles for the Ukrainian army. At the same time, Japan stated that they will send a large number of weapons and ammunition from the Japanese army inventory to Ukraine. It was also announced that 50 Japanese officers will be sent to Ukraine for the training of these tanks. Japanese officials stated that they know that the Russian army is having a hard time in Ukraine, and they hope that with the support sent, the Ukrainian territory will be completely liberated from occupation, stating that they will organize a new military shipment again in the coming months after the tanks and armored vehicles arrive in Ukraine and the training are completed. Japanese officials also stated that they have decided to increase the sanctions and embargoes they have imposed on Russia. The tanks and armored vehicles that Japan has agreed to send are expected to arrive in the coming weeks. The attack by the Russian Navy ship on the Japanese islands was one of Putin's biggest mistakes, having forced Japan, which has long maintained a neutral stance, into the war. Putin now has to fight with Japanese tanks in Ukraine after the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida's statements. Putin's response was not delayed. Continuing his foreign policy aggression, Putin decided to send the Belgorod submarine known as Russia's War Machine to the Kuril Islands. This submarine, Russia's largest naval force, is known as the largest submarine produced by the Russian military in the last 30 years. This submarine, named Belgorod, is full of nuclear weapons. This nuclear weapon on the submarine has the power to destroy a large city. Shortly after Vladimir Putin's statement, the Japanese intelligence service stated that the Belgorod submarine arrived off the Kuril Island and was kept waiting here. Thus, Putin, who is already at war with Ukraine, wants to fuel a new war with this move. Vladimir Putin continues to drag Russia into the abyss. The recent protests and anti-Putin demonstrations in Russia have started to scare the Russian leader. Faced with the danger of losing his throne, Putin is trying to win the support of the Russian people by creating a new war. The Russian leader is aware that he can continue in office as long as they continue to be at war. Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky thanked Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in his speech to the parliament, announcing that Ukraine has gained a new ally. Zelensky promised that they will not let Japan's support go to waste and that they will liberate their country from the invading Russian forces. Ukraine and Japan have a long-standing friendship. As you know, Ukraine was the first country to recognize that the Kuril Islands annexed by Russia belonged to Japan. The Ukrainian leader invited the Japanese Prime Minister to Kiev to brief him on the ongoing war. The news that the Russian army was planning to launch a new attack on Ukrainian territory caused many states to break neutrality. Realizing that a new Russian landing in Ukraine would lead to a complete loss of Ukrainian territory, the countries allied with Ukraine started to increase their support for Ukraine. Even Germany, which had long resisted sending armored vehicles and tanks to Ukraine, agreed to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine. The German government stated that the shipment of 14 Leopard 2 tanks for the Ukrainian army has started. At the same time, the United States said they would send Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Many countries have mobilized for Ukraine. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has started to prepare for this attack by the Russian army. Zelensky, who sent thousands of soldiers to the Belarusian border, thinks that Russia will attack first from the Belarusian border since the Belarusian border is very close to Kiev. The Russian army can advance quickly and invade Kiev. Zelensky, who wants to prevent this, has started to create defense lines and fronts in Ukrainian cities bordering Belarus. In addition, Zelensky said that the HIMARS missiles sent by the US to Ukraine will be placed in areas close to the Belarusian border and stated that they will prevent a new invasion of Russian forces. Ukrainian citizens living on Ukraine's border with Belarus are also helping Ukrainian soldiers. The locals have started to work with Ukrainian soldiers to create defense lines and set traps. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is expected to announce a mobilization in the near future. With the announcement of this mobilization, Putin seems to start his new attack.